John. Hey, John. Good to see you. John. Hey, guys. Nice to meet you. Yeah. Heard about you guys. Cool. That's right. Got it.
Mr. Secretary, these are some of the manufacturing workers for our member companies. Jay Timmons, how are you?
Very cool. Yeah, come on here. Okay, you guys ready to start? Good afternoon, everybody. We are very glad to have our Treasury Secretary, Secretary Mnuchin, with us today. I also want to welcome Jay Timmons, a good friend of ours and who's president of the National Association of Manufacturers, and some of his members who we're going to be hearing from shortly. It was 6 months ago today that Congress passed the first tax reform in a generation. What a great 6 months this has been. More than 1 million jobs have been created in the last 6 months since tax reform. Unemployment is at its lowest level in half a century. Wages are picking up. Today, there is a record optimism among our nation's manufacturers. We're going to hear more from them about that. Tax reform, to be blunt, is the game changer our economy needed. Last fall, Jay and I visited a small manufacturer on Maryland's Eastern Shore, Dixon Valve. Dixon Valve has been around for more than 100 years. They make hose fittings there. This is a family-owned business with great-paying jobs, but their story sounded all too familiar. It was about how the taxes and the regulations had taken their toll. It was about how there was so much uncertainty in the future. And who could blame them? America had the worst tax code in the industrialized world. But now things are getting much, much better. In just 6 months, tax reform has already improved so many people's lives. This spring, like hundreds of companies across the country, Dixon Valve announced that it would give out bonuses to all of its employees as a direct result of tax reform. In a letter to his workers, the company's CEO wrote that tax reform is helping companies like Dixon reinvest in the future. Tax reform is working. Tax reform is working not just by improving people's lives, but by improving people's prospects. It is replacing that cloud of uncertainty that we had in this country with an absolute renewed sense of optimism. This just shows that when you promote economic growth and economic opportunity, it opens up more possibilities for people to truly flourish and prosper. Now, a lot of people thought this day would never come. There were skeptics who thought we wouldn't get tax reform done, let alone get it done in 2017. And then there were some cynics who thought it would literally lead to the end of the world. I'm not making this up. It's not an overstatement. There were predictions of actual apocalyptical doom by people on the other side of the aisle. Well, that didn't happen. Great things are happening. And we had a president and a Treasury Secretary who were all in to help make that happen. We had a Ways and Means Chairman who was certainly all in, who because of him this was made possible, and so many others. So right now I would like to turn it over to the architect of this new tax code, our Ways and Means Chairman, a gentleman from Texas, Mr. Brady.
Speaker, let me start by saying we know passing the first pro-growth comprehensive tax reform in a generation certainly wasn't easy. And it took a lot of work to make this what it's become, a home run for the American people. But I want to first thank you, Speaker. Without the years of leadership and your leadership this past year, the huge undertaking of reforming our outdated tax code would simply never have happened. So, Speaker, thank you. To Jay, for your leadership of America's manufacturers, such a big part of America's future. This pro-growth tax reform would not have occurred but for your leadership. And Mr. Secretary, you and President Trump played such a key role in laying out the urgency for a new tax code for the American people. And then together, the White House, the House and Senate tax writers, creating the framework which made this possible in 2017. Thank you for that. Think about in 6 months what has happened. So in the past, America's jobs were moving overseas, it seemed like on a weekly basis. Americans' families hadn't seen a paycheck increase for more than a decade. Our students coming out of school, their job opportunities were limited. And every expert was telling America, that's slow growth of the last decade. Just get used to it. That's all you're going to see for the next decade as well. Well, congressional Republicans and President Trump thought otherwise. And now look at where we're at, 6 months later after we have a new pro-growth tax code. We've transformed this nation from asking where are the jobs to one that asks where are the workers, because we now have the jobs. In the 6 months since we reformed the tax code, we have the fastest growth in investments in new equipment and technology since 2011. Wages for families are growing at the fastest pace in a decade. Consumer confidence is out of the roof. Home sales and home prices have risen at the fastest pace in 5 years, and the number of Americans planning to buy a new home in the next 6 months is at the highest record ever. And maybe most importantly, Main Street businesses are roaring back, expanding and growing like never before. America is back, and boy, our economy is reflecting that. Small business optimism hit its highest record level in 45 years. And manufacturers are now armed with one of the most pro-growth tax codes in the world. And since tax reform was signed into law, over 70% of manufacturers have increased hiring and their workers' wages due to tax reform. We've now, too, seen almost 9 out of 10 manufacturers increase their investments, investing in their business, their workers, in their future. And I think of Russell Marine in Houston, Texas, 160 employees. Because of tax reform, their workers received a 10% increase in their pay. They gave out nearly $1 million of bonuses to their workers. They invested and bought nearly $6 million of equipment, including the largest movable crane in Texas, and they green-lighted a new company headquarters because of their confidence in the future. And when the press asked the head of Russell Marine, what's this year look like because of tax reform, his answer was 3 words: best year ever. This is huge. We know what it's doing here in America in a positive way. Our foreign competitors are taking notice as well. So our message to China, Europe, and the others who now know we have one of the most pro-growth tax codes in the world is we're going to continue to lead the pack in the world to make sure America is the best place on the planet for that new job, that new investment, that new company. And I still believe, Mr. Speaker, the best is yet to come, because businesses are starting to bring back those jobs, those new facilities, those patents and research to America, and we are never going to be complacent. We'll continue to fight for the American workers, the American families, to make sure this is the best place on earth for that new job. With that, I want to welcome to the podium the Secretary of the Treasury, who played such a key role in getting this new tax code into law, Secretary Mnuchin.
Thank you. Well, I think the speaker had the best line. This really is a game changer. It took us over 30 years, but we finally have a tax code that works for hard-working taxpayers. That's what this is all about. Not a tax plan for big government, but a tax plan for hard-working taxpayers. We have a tax plan that has lowered business rates, so this is creating economic opportunities for our workers, and we're seeing that in wages, we're seeing that in bonuses, and we're seeing that in better jobs. And we're seeing literally thousands of companies that have brought back trillions of dollars to invest here in the United States in new manufacturing, in new jobs, in new economic opportunities for hardworking Americans. So I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm also pleased to announce that next week we will be unveiling the new 1040, and it will be a postcard as we've promised, and hardworking taxpayers won't have to spend nearly as much time filling out their taxes. Thank you.
Thanks for saying. Some more good news. Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I want to provide some perspective from the National Association of Manufacturers. And first and foremost, I do want to thank the speaker. I want to thank Chairman Brady and certainly Secretary Mnuchin for the incredible work getting this across the line. I can tell you this. For manufacturers, we've been working 30 years for competitive tax policy. We have some scars to prove that we've been working hard for that. But it has been incredibly important for the future and the success of manufacturing in the United States. But most importantly, I want to thank the men and women of manufacturing, the men and women who make things, their families, because they understood what was at stake for the future, not only of their jobs, but of their enterprises. And today, I can say that they are better off because of the leadership of the men and women of this body, the Senate, and of course, the President. So now we've got some more numbers that will illustrate the point. Today, as many of you have probably seen, the National Association of Manufacturers released the results of this quarter's Manufacturing Outlook Survey. And for the first time in the more than 20-year history of this survey, more than 95% of manufacturers, 95%, have said that they have a positive outlook for their businesses. That is, again, an all-time record. Manufacturers surveyed also predict a 4.1% increase in investments and a 3.1% increase in hiring, both, again, all-time highs. And they predict the highest rate of wage increases, 2.7%, since 2001. This is not an accident. This is not an accident at all. It's fueled by the history-making tax reform that was passed 6 months ago. Now, last year, manufacturers pointed out that if Congress and the administration could enact competitive tax reform, that we, as a business community, and certainly as manufacturers, would have a responsibility to deliver for our people and for our communities. And now we're keeping our promises. We've asked our manufacturers what their plans are for the future, and here's what they've said. 86% plan to increase investments. 77% plan to increase hiring. 72% plan to increase wages and benefits. In other words, even though we've already seen great stories of workers getting bonuses, some that the chairman just outlined, getting raises, getting new jobs, the fact is we're just getting started. Tax reform as well as regulatory relief is truly the rocket fuel that the President said it would be when he addressed our board of directors last year. And American businesses, especially manufacturers, will keep that momentum going. And so, by the way, to those who are already talking about raising taxes on American businesses, who don't believe that economic growth and the potential for future economic growth is real, I say this. I've talked to the working mom who told me about the raise that is helping to support her children. I've talked to the young worker on a shop floor who told me about the promotion he just got that enabled him to buy a home for the first time in his life. And I've talked to that dad who's just leaving the military who told me that he got a new job thanks in part to tax reform and the new jobs that were created at the manufacturing facility where he now works. Tax reform is moving America in the right direction. And manufacturers, and this is important, manufacturers are going to keep our promise. We will invest, we will hire, and we will raise wages and benefits. And we will stand with those who stood with us. So I want to thank you all so much for being here to talk about the 6-month anniversary. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to two gentlemen who are right on the front lines, who know what comprehensive tax reform meant for their businesses and their workers. And the first is Drew Greenblatt. Drew is a leader with the National Association of Manufacturers. He is the chairman of the NAM's Small and Medium Manufacturers Group. 90% of our 14,000 members are small and medium-sized manufacturers, and he's the president and owner of Marlin Steel in Baltimore. So, Drew, could you come forward and share your story? Thank you. Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Speaker Ryan. Thank you, Chairman Brady. We really appreciate your efforts to improve the climate for manufacturing in America. Manufacturers are unbelievably fired up. We are extremely excited about the future. We're confident, we're optimistic, and it's because the policies have changed in Washington and they've taken off the shackles so we can compete against countries all across the world. Marlin Steel, my company, we're a 50-year-old company. We're based in Baltimore City in the southwest section of Baltimore City. We only make things in America. We only use American steel. We can compete now like no other time because we have a level playing field. We have a better playing field than our competition. It's because the extraordinary efforts of the Speaker and Mr. Brady and Mr. Mnuchin and President getting this across the line, making this happen. Because of their activities, they've made it viable for us to have optimism and be excited about the future. Let's talk about Marlin in particular. We've hired 20% more people. One of them is Josh behind me. He's a welder. Since he was hired, he's bought a car. He moved into a nicer apartment. His life has changed. In February, his paycheck actually got bigger because he gets more money. He saves more money because the taxes are less oppressive on him. But this is happening with our other employees that are getting opportunities to get pulled out of poverty and move into the middle class. Also, we've heavily invested in new equipment. When Secretary Brady said that we're going to be able to instantly expense new equipment, a gun was shot. And all American manufacturers' ears perked up, and we went at it. We started buying the best equipment so we could slay the competition. If we give Josh and his teammates at our factory great equipment, they could beat China. They could beat Germany. They could beat Mexico. We'll throttle them. We just need great tools. And we started buying tools. We bought a saw from Arkansas that was made in Arkansas. We bought a robotic welding machine that was made in Cleveland. We turned it on. We bought over $1.2 million of new equipment that's been installed. It's working at the factory now, and it's making Josh and his teammates more effective, and we can beat foreign countries now, all made in America, thanks to what the activities that Secretary Mnuchin pushing this through and the Speaker and Chairman Brady. This means bigger paychecks. This means better tools. This means a better shot for the American manufacturer because we're going to hire more people and we're going to give our teammates the best tools possible. This is going to have a real impact in real people's lives. This is not theoretical, inside Washington stuff. This is happening on Main Street. It's happening in Westport, southwest Baltimore City. It can happen. It's happening all over America. We're very enthusiastic about the future, and it's a tremendous testament to these new and better policies. Thank you again. We really appreciate your efforts to help manufacturing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Drew. You can tell why he's a leader of the National Association of Manufacturing. His passion is infectious. So also joining us is John Williams with Jamison Door of Hagerstown, Maryland. He is on the front lines as well, on the shop floor. And John, could you give us a little perspective on what tax reform has meant for Jamison?
Great to see you. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, we're deeply grateful for the work that you've done in passing the tax reform. At Jamison Door Company, it has had a major impact on our outlook of the business that we expect to come. We manufacture temperature-controlled doors in Hagerstown, Maryland, and Lewistown, Montana. And we do it with the good folks like behind me who also come from Jamison. As part of the benefits of tax reform, we've done several things. First of all, last August, in anticipation of the benefits of tax reform, and then in February, after it had actually passed, each employee in the company got a week's salary as a bonus with the proceeds that come from the benefits of tax reform. Meanwhile, we're growing our facilities. We have a new optimism because of the new business climate that we believe exists in the country. We expect in the next 3 years to add 15% to the number of employees that we have, good paying jobs in our plants. We plan to add about 50,000 square feet in a new plant because of our optimistic outlook, and that will bring our total investment for a company our size to a pretty significant amount of about $5 million. So tax reform has absolutely made it more feasible for us to undertake these projects and to have a very optimistic outlook about the future of our company and the business climate that exists in this country.
John and Drew, you've given us just a perfect picture of what real economic growth looks like in America. This economic growth looks like this in America because of tax reform. So I want to thank you for being here to tell your stories. We are seeing these stories told across America by the thousands because tax reform is working. Drew, you mentioned you want to buy all these American-made tools. I can only assume that you're also looking at Snap-on tools made in Kenosha, Wisconsin, as you're doing that assessment. But I want to thank. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You know Nick well. So I want to thank Secretary Mnuchin for taking the time out of his busy schedule. Chairman Brady, most importantly, Jay, you, and all the folks here at NAM. Thank you very much. This is just a perfect capstone to the fact that this is 6 months of tax reform passing, and look at the phenomenal news that we have seen in just the last 6 months. We're so excited to see what happens in not just the next 6 months, but the next 6 years. Thank you, everybody. This concludes our event.